That morning, Little Creek Naval Base in Virginia was still wrapped in its signature quiet. The sound of tactical boots striking concrete, commands echoing from afar, and the ocean wind carrying the scent of salt through the cold gray barracks. Amid that disciplined scene, a man quietly pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway. No one turned their head. No one cared who he was. He was merely part of the backdrop, an invisible figure within the massive machinery of the Navy. Except for one person. An 8-year-old girl, clutching his hand, skipping beside him and calling him by the simplest, warmest word in the world: Dad. That afternoon, the peace was shattered. An arrogant naval officer stood in the middle of the mess hall, in front of dozens of service members, intentionally mocking the man openly. His voice rang out, half joking, half insulting. "Hey, Janitor buddy, what's your call sign? Captain Mopstick?" No one thought the man would respond. No one expected the truth hidden behind his calm smile. No one imagined that in just a few seconds, the entire base would freeze. And then, when he finally spoke, slow, steady, the room seemed to turn to stone. Metal spoons dropped onto stainless steel trays. Eyes widened, the air hardened like glass. Because, in that moment, a legend they believed had vanished forever, suddenly stepped out of the shadows. Before we dive into this emotional journey, one of honor, fatherhood, and redemption, if you love stories about kindness, inner strength, and second chances in life, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss any stories like this. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin. Dawn at Virginia Beach always carried a quietness of its own. Like the gentle breath of the ocean before tactical boots struck concrete, before the scent of sea salt mingled with jet fuel, and the clipped commands of military discipline. At the Little Creek Amphibious Naval Base in Virginia, greatness usually walked in polished shoes and perfectly pressed white uniforms. Here, reputation wasn't just respected, it was the currency of an entire life. But there was one man who walked those hallways with no rank, no medals, no salutes, no glances. Only a few sideways looks, a couple of scoffs, or worse, a cold indifference. Alexander Steele pushed his mop along the polished hallway. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing hands that did not belong to the job he was doing. These were not hands meant for a mop. They were hands shaped by storms, by steel cables screaming in the wind, by salt water, and decisions where being off by a millimeter meant losing a life. Strong, scarred, and silent. His chestnut-brown hair touched the back of his shirt, trimmed yet uninterested in fitting any template. The faded light green shirt hung loose over broad shoulders, shoulders that had once given their youth to something far greater than himself. His shoes weren't regulation, but they were steady, practical, and quiet, like him. Alexander worked with method. Wipe, wring, wipe. No wasted movement, no laziness. A precision carried only by those trained to survive the impossible and bring that discipline into mundane tasks. But no one here knew that. Or at least, they thought so. 2 young SEAL candidates walked past him, laughing without bothering to lower their voices. There he is again. Thought the Navy had enough budget to buy cleaning robots by now. Budget cuts, the other snorted. Plus, he looks like he just crawled out of a cabin in the mountains. Alexander didn't react. No frown, no glance. He had learned long ago that if you truly know who you are, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. A voice sharp enough to cut steel sliced through the hallway. Eyes forward. Move. The 2 trainees snapped to attention, necks straight like someone had pulled a string. A woman in a flawless white uniform approached. Commander Rachel Brennan. Her stride was graceful yet firm, dark brown hair pinned neatly under her white cover. She carried the aura of someone who had stood in too many crises to mistake noise for power. In a single second, her eyes flicked toward Alexander. She noticed the massed, steady posture, the precision in every movement, the silence that wasn't weakness. The way he moved like someone who had once led men, not mopped floors. Something didn't add up. She glanced back once more, slight furrow in her brow. But duty pulled her forward. Alexander kept working. He had just reached the end of the hallway when small footsteps pattered behind him, quick and excited. "Daddy!" A gust of golden hair and a bright smile collided into him. Maya Steele, 8 years old, eyes shining like early sunlight, her backpack bouncing with each step. Alexander's face changed instantly, softening like ice melting under the first warm ray of spring. "There you are, my little girl," he said, his voice deep, warm, and tender. Maya wrapped her arms around him. Alexander bent down to her eye level, gently fixing the wind-blown lock of blonde hair. Her eyes always sparkled with curiosity. Maya saw more than adults ever expected a child to see. "Can I have lunch with you today?" she asked, swinging her backpack, grinning from ear to ear. "Of course," Alexander answered, still carrying that familiar warmth. "I made sandwiches for the two of us." She let out a dramatic sigh of relief. "Did you cut off the crust?" Alexander pretended to be offended. "You underestimate your father's crust removal protocol." Maya burst into a fit of giggles, her laughter spilling into the cold hallway like sunlight. Father and daughter walked toward the mess hall, chatting non-stop. Maya talked about school, about the lighthouse drawing she was proud of, and about how Miss Taylor said she had a brave heart. Alexander listened, truly listened, nodding, smiling, eyes full of pride. He was the kind of father who carried his battles in silence, but laid out his love in full. The lunchroom buzzed like a rising tide, the smell of food, utensils hitting stainless steel trays, boots thumping, bursts of laughter tangled with military tension. Alexander and Maya chose a corner table, the quieter spot. A tiny piece of the world, unnoticed, but safe. He unpacked 2 simple lunches, turkey sandwiches, sliced apples, small Tupperware containers. Nothing fancy, nothing decorated, but full of care. Maya took a bite, her cheeks puffing out instantly. "This is the greatest sandwich ever created in human history." Alexander chuckled. "I'll submit it to the Smithsonian." A few tables ahead, 2 young sailors glanced at him. "There's the janitor again," one muttered. "Weird guy," the other whispered. "He's always so calm. Probably used to cleaning prison floors." Another snicker. Alexander didn't react. He never did. Instead, he quietly slid a napkin under Maya's juice cup so it wouldn't spill on her shirt. That was the only battle he cared to win, keeping his daughter's world clean, safe, untouched. Across the room, Commander Rachel Brennan entered. As she walked, she discussed her meeting schedule with an aide, but her eyes drifted across the rows of tables. She stopped when she saw Alexander and the blonde girl sitting together. In an environment hardened by orders and discipline, that father-daughter picture felt like a strange breeze. And what caught her attention even more was the softness radiating from a man who looked carved from silent storms. There was something in his posture, humble but not bowed, gentle yet not fragile. A steadiness of someone who chose to stand back, not someone forced to. Officers kept talking to her, but Rachel barely heard them anymore. Suddenly, Maya spotted her. The girl waved, smile bright as sunlight. Rachel paused, caught off guard by the sudden innocence, then politely nodded back. Alexander nodded too, a respectful nod, measured, nothing extra. Rachel moved on, but something about that man made her feel uneasy in a way she couldn't define. The mess hall doors opened again. Another group of officers entered, louder, more confident, more showy. Leading them was Captain Brett Harrison, chest full of medals, chin slightly raised, flanked by junior officers eager to laugh and nod at the right time. He always entered like that. To Harrison, power wasn't just something to hold. It had to be performed. His eyes soon found Alexander. amusement curling into a mocking smirk. "Look at that," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Top naval base in the country, and we're hiring mountain janitors now." Laughter erupted from his entourage. Maya looked up, pale blue eyes flickering with confusion. Alexander simply rested his hand on her back. Light, reassuring, not defensive. He didn't look at Harrison. Didn't need to. From afar, Rachel Brennan watched everything unfold. She exhaled, a breath heavy with frustration. Not at Alexander. At the attitude of a man who believed rank defined a person's worth. Harrison continued through the mess hall, ego first, entourage shuffling behind. In his eyes, Alexander wasn't worth a second glance. But Alexander's silence wasn't submission. It was steel wrapped in humility. And in a room full of medals, ranks, and military pride, no one knew that the quietest man there had once carried a call sign that made the entire ocean take notice. No one knew that behind that faded shirt and practical shoes, a legend slept. And legends do not roar. They wait for the right moment to awaken. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the base playground, pulling long shadows from the swings, monkey bars, and the miniature submarine and helicopter structures built on the rough concrete. Children shouted, chased one another, climbed up the scaled-down tactical models as if the outside world didn't exist at all. Parents, most of them in uniform, sat along the neatly arranged benches with the signature precision of the military. And then there was Alexander. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, leaning against a tree, lunch container in hand. His posture was calm like the sea after a storm, quiet yet deep. Maya swung high on the swing, her legs kicking into the air, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner of pure joy. Her laughter rang out above the chaotic chorus of children. Clear, bright, a patch of sunlight in a place built on discipline and sacrifice. Nearby, a few Navy mothers whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry, but still clear to his ears. "That's the janitor's daughter, isn't it? Poor thing. Sweet kid, but her dad, rough around the edges, probably discharged without honor or something. Who ends up cleaning floors, anyway?" Alexander heard every word, but his back stayed relaxed. His expression didn't change. Years forged in fire and gunmetal had turned him into steel. Rumors could not pierce him. Still, something flickered in his eyes, like the shadow of storms that once swept through his life. Maya ran up to him, cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. "Daddy! Daddy, guess what? I beat everyone at tag. Even the big kids." She puffed out her chest proudly. Alexander knelt to her eye level, gently plucking a leaf caught in her hair. "That's my girl," he murmured, fast as the wind. A boy of about 10, the son of a naval officer, walked up. Mini flight jacket, expression far too confident for his age. "My dad's a commander," he announced, like reciting an achievement. "What do you do in the Navy, Mr. Steele? My dad says only losers end up cleaning." The air dropped like metal hitting concrete. A few adults turned their heads, waiting to see how the quiet janitor would react. Maya's small hands curled into tight fists, her face flushed with anger. "Don't talk to my dad like that," she shouted, voice trembling but fierce. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, not to stop her defense, but to teach her how to control it. "It's all right," he said, voice steady as always. Then he turned to the boy and offered a gentle smile. "I did what I was asked to do. I served where I was assigned. Now I do this, and that is enough." The boy frowned, confused. Children understood bragging or fear, not honest humility. He walked away, carrying a strange sense of bewilderment with him. Maya tugged on her father's sleeve, her voice small but determined. "Daddy, why don't they know? Why does no one know who you used to be?" That was a child's intuition, catching what adults missed. Maya didn't understand ranks, call signs, or medals, but she understood her father, his quiet strength, the depth beneath him. And she wondered why the world couldn't see what she saw. Alexander looked at her. In his seasoned eyes, something softened, like ice melting under sunlight. "My love," he whispered, brushing the back of his hand against her cheek. "No one needs to know." "But you used to be someone amazing," she pleaded. "You were brave. You helped people. Why hide it?" Alexander exhaled slowly, a breath carrying memories not meant for young ears. "I'm still that person," he replied, "just not in the way they measure things here." Maya's face scrunched with innocence and confusion. "But they look at you like you're nobody. I don't like that." He touched her nose lightly, a small, warm gesture. "You knowing the truth is enough for me," he said. "Sometimes the world only sees uniforms, medals, shiny things, but I don't need applause. I just need you to smile like you do now." Maya's eyes shimmered. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him into a tight hug. "I'll always smile for you." No one noticed that Commander Rachel Brennan stood not far away, coffee in hand, a meeting schedule tucked under her arm. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but she had heard, and what she heard made her chest tighten. She watched Alexander, not through the eyes of an officer assessing subordinates, but with the intuition of a woman who had seen the military world from many angles. She saw a father choosing kindness over ego, a humility medals couldn't teach, a quiet strength rare in an environment that valued rank over humanity. An aide hurried toward her. "Ma'am, the meeting is in 10 minutes. Rachel nodded, but her eyes stayed elsewhere, fixed on the father and daughter standing in the sunlight. There was something familiar about him, not his face, but the way he stood, the way he controlled his breathing. The silent command woven into every subtle movement, a level of mastery that wasn't forced, but lived. The aide followed her gaze. "The janitor? Rumor is he just needed a job. Never got promoted. Maybe." Rachel lifted her hand, small gesture, sharp as a blade. "That's enough." The aide fell silent. Rachel didn't judge by rumor. She judged by presence. And Alexander Steele's presence did not match the label janitor at all. It pulled at her like the tide pulling a hull toward shore. With Maya running off to play again, Rachel approached the two, quiet, unpressured. Alexander straightened, a reflex, not fear. He nodded politely. "Good afternoon, Commander." Most civilians and even sailors fumbled in her presence, but he didn't. Not arrogant, not submissive, just steady. "Good afternoon, Mr. Steele," Rachel replied, her eyes flicking to Maya. "Your daughter? She's got spirit." Alexander smiled, a softening that lived only in the face of a seasoned man. "She gets that from her mother." Rachel's chest tightened again. She recognized in his eyes a loss, the kind that made people grow in a very different way. She said, without realizing her voice had softened, "You carry something different. Not like most people who mop floors." Alexander simply nodded. "Life has its seasons, and this is mine." Not false humility, not avoidance, simply acceptance. That truth unsettled Rachel more than any firm answer would have. A long silence settled between them, not awkward, but thick with unspoken understanding. A quiet respect. Then Rachel's radio crackled, slicing the moment apart. Duty called. "I hope this season of yours is peaceful," she said, almost sincerely. Alexander nodded. "Thank you." Rachel walked away, but not with a calm heart. Why did the words of a janitor leave such weight in her chest? And why did she have the sudden feeling that this man had once stood somewhere entirely different? In a uniform the whole world had once honored? Maya ran back, breathless. "Daddy, why didn't you tell her who you are?" Alexander watched Rachel's figure disappear up the steps, his voice low, steady, almost like a prayer. "She doesn't need to know." "Not yet." Maya frowned. But someone should know. Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her off the playground. "If the truth matters," he said softly, "it will find its way out." Rachel Brennan, as she stepped up the stairs, paused for a heartbeat. Her hand tightened on the railing. A quiet realization flickered in her eyes. Some men don't run from anything. Some legends are simply resting. And those legends do not disappear. They just wait for the right moment to rise. The next morning, the base woke early as always. The sound of reveille stretched across the barracks, the sky still bruised blue-purple with dawn. Steel doors slammed, tactical boots pounded in rhythm on the floor. The military pulse beat steady, resolute. Alexander Steele moved through it all, pushing a cleaning supply cart down the long administrative corridor. The mop bucket wheels clicked with a soft, regular creak. No one saluted him, yet he walked with the posture of someone who is saluted, upright, measured, alert. The ceiling lights flicked on, fluttered, then steadied, reflecting off the glossy floor, already spotless before the noise, thanks to his familiar morning work. He liked this moment, before the clamor, before the stares. Peace had become his refuge, not because it lacked sound, but because it lacked judgment. But in crowded places, peace never lasts long. As his cart rolled past the SEAL training area, laughter rang from the locker room, sharp, cutting at the ear. Alexander recognized that tone at once. Young men untested, eager to build rank where none yet existed. "That guy thinks he's Navy royalty," a tipsy, mocking voice said, "mopping like he's conducting an orchestra." Another voice cut in, "Probably got kicked out, screwed up something big." "Or washed out of Buddy S," someone added. "Looks exactly like he couldn't survive Hell Week." More laughter, loud, crude, inflated by the insecurity hiding behind bravado. Alexander kept pushing. His face was calm, but inside his chest, a memory beat time. Men gasping for air in icy surf, sand grinding into every pore, water hammering until only will remained standing. Hell Week wasn't where he broke. It was where he learned endurance could crack the world itself. He rolled on, not a word spoken. But someone inside had noticed that silence. A SEAL candidate, broad-shouldered, high and tight haircut, still carrying the scent of polished academy, was laughing when he suddenly froze at the sight of Alexander's forearm as he tugged up his sleeve. There, a curved, deep, jagged scar, born of metal and fire. Not clumsiness, not bad luck, not an accident. It was the battlefield's kiss, earned in blood, not bestowed. The young man's face changed color. He didn't fully understand it, but he felt it, like prey instinctively sensing a hunter from the corner of its eye before seeing the fangs. Alexander dipped his head to him, a silent acknowledgement. Respect offered, not demanded. The kid swallowed, turned back to the group, stomach dropping, noise thinning out. For the first time, a seed of doubt slipped into their little circle. Alexander continued toward the mess hall, where custodial staff murmured and stainless steel trays clinked. Halfway down the corridor, he stopped. Instinct, not hesitation. Someone was watching him. He turned slightly. At the far end of the hallway, Commander Rachel Brennan held a clipboard, speaking with an aide. But her eyes weren't on the paperwork. They were locked on him. Not judgment, not ridicule. Curiosity. Slow, meticulous. A kind of recognition unconnected to memory. Alexander bowed his head politely. Rachel returned a measured nod, the kind senior officers unconsciously give to those they respect, even if they can't yet explain why. Before they could say anything, a rush of footsteps surged in. An off-duty group of SEALs, loud, confident, cut between them. One of them gave Alexander a shoulder check. Harder than accidental. "Careful there, old man," he smirked. "Mops are dangerous. Might throw your back out." Rachel's eyes narrowed a notch. Alexander only tightened his grip on the cart handle. "It's all right," he said lightly. It wasn't deference, it was grace. But the SEAL wasn't done. Ego rarely retreats without demanding a little trophy. "So what did they call you back in the Navy, huh? Captain Mopstick?" Laughter popped behind him. Rachel stepped forward half a pace, small but loaded with command. Without words, her presence split the air like the blade of discipline. Alexander glanced at her, composed. He didn't need anyone to rescue him. Strangely, that made her want to intervene even more. A beat passed, then a small voice piped up. "Maya!" Hugging a bouncing backpack as she rounded the corner. "Daddy!" She rushed in and wrapped herself around his leg. Innocence was the armor he chose instead of medals. The SEALs went silent. Children have a strange power. They turn cruelty into farce. Maya tilted her head at them. "Why are you talking not nice to my dad?" The hallway seemed to stop. Even the steel walls leaned in to listen. The SEAL's grin faded, a flicker of shame. Rough, but real. "We were just joking," he muttered. "Jokes are supposed to make people happy." Maya frowned. "You said it wrong." Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, little one." Then he looked up at the SEALs. "Have a good day, gentlemen. Look out for each other. No ego, no counterpunch, only quiet truth." The SEAL gave a stiff nod, now off balance. Yes, sir." "Sir." The word slipped out by instinct. Whatever he wore, Alexander Steele carried a gravity-like force, unseen but indisputable. The group hurried off, glancing back now and then, their eyes mixing respect and confusion. Two things they hadn't yet learned to name. Maya tugged at her father's sleeve. "Why did they laugh at you? You're the bravest person I know." Alexander knelt, his thumb resting on her cheek. "People laugh when they don't understand. That's okay. The world isn't always kind. But we can be." From a distance, Rachel kept watching. Something shifted in her chest. Leadership, she had believed, was about control, power, strategy. But this man led without title, without uniform, by character alone. Maya suddenly pointed at her father's forearm. "They don't know about that, Daddy." Alexander gently lowered her hand. "Some stories have to live in the heart first." Rachel's gaze slid to the scar. Curiosity flashed, sharp-edged. Scars like that don't come from everyday stumbles. They come from stepping into fire and refusing to remain there. A quiet storm churned behind her eyes. Rachel stepped forward. "Mr. Steele." Alexander turned. "Commander, where did you serve?" Her voice softened a degree. His face was kind but closed. "In Ecuador and Cold Stone. Anywhere they needed me." He paused. "A long time ago." Rachel studied him. The steadiness, the confidence that posed no threat, the humility found only in those who once held great power and chose to let it go. "I see," she said quietly. Not the answer she'd hoped for, but the truth he allowed, and she respected that. Maya tugged at his hand. "Let's go, Daddy. I'm hungry." Alexander smiled. "Time for breakfast." He turned to Rachel. "Have a good morning, Commander." She nodded slowly, watched the two of them leave, plain, unassuming, and, somehow, more commanding than all the gilded corridors around them. Rumors drifted through the base all that day. But for the first time, doubt crept between the whispers. Because legends don't announce themselves. They leave cracks in the wall, where the light of truth leaks through. A scar, a silence. A moment when even arrogance shifts aside as greatness passes by, quiet as a shadow. And somewhere deep inside Commander Rachel Brennan, an understanding began to take root. This was not a man who had fallen. This was a man who had stood, then chosen to rest. By noon, the base mess hall throbbed with the rhythm only military communities truly understood. The clatter of metal trays, conversations about briefings, a sergeant barking at recruits to head straight to the water station instead of sneaking past the vending machines. A perfect portrait of order, discipline, and ego. Alexander Steele entered quietly as always, Maya skipping beside him, clutching a paper lunch bag decorated with scribbled stars and half-finished dolphins. Her laughter rose above the surrounding noise, the only sound not shaped by routine or rank. Alexander carried a simple tray, 2 sandwiches, sliced apples, carrot sticks, and 2 small paper cups of chocolate milk. Nothing fancy, nothing for show. A meal made from love, not convenience. They sat in their usual spot, the corner table by the window, far from the crowd and curious eyes. Maya swung her legs under the chair, her shoes not yet reaching the floor. "Daddy," she said as she opened her sandwich, "did you know sea otters hold hands when they sleep, so they don't float away?" Alexander chuckled, using a plastic knife to cut her apple slices. "Smart creatures. Maybe the next time you fall asleep during story time, I should hold your hand like that?" Maya gasped theatrically. "Daddy, I won't float away. I stick to you like glue." Warmth swelled in Alexander's chest, the kind of warmth men who had stood on battlefields rarely admitted to. This moment, this table, this child, this was the only mission he still considered important. The rest of the world was just noise. Across the room, officers gathered in clusters, bright white uniforms, gleaming insignia. The most striking among them entered with a confidence polished to a shine, heels hitting the floor in a practiced rhythm, rows of ribbons glittering under the fluorescent lights. Captain Brett Harrison. He carried authority the way others wore cologne, strong, sharp, and impossible to ignore. His own laughter punched the air as he clapped a hand on another officer's shoulder. "Let's move, gentlemen. Briefing in 30 minutes. Washington won't be waiting on us." Laughter followed him like pilot fish tailing a shark. Maya kept happily chewing her sandwich. Alexander sipped his chocolate milk, silent, invisible. At least that's what everyone thought. Until Harrison's voice sliced through the room. "Well, well, look who we have here." Harrison stopped directly in front of their table. A wave of laughter rolled behind him, a pack sound, cruel simply because it could be. Alexander lifted his head, not angry, not wounded, just present. Harrison crossed his arms, chest pushed out like a peacock responding to applause. "The hardest working man on base. How's the floor-saving business today, buddy? Saving the world? One stain at a time?" Maya froze mid-bite. Alexander placed his hand gently on hers, a wordless reassurance. "My daughter is eating," he said, voice calm. "Please, show some respect." A ripple of whispers swept through the mess hall, small but enough to shift the air. People can hear truth even before they understand why. Harrison laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "Relax, Janitor. We're just having fun." He leaned closer, voice intentionally louder. "So, what's your call sign, huh? Captain Mopstick? Or Boss Bucket?" Laughter swelled, shallow, sharp, careless. Maya's face flushed with anger. "Stop it! My dad—" Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. A clear message. "Let me handle this." He wiped his mouth, slow, steady. Then he set the napkin down, met Harrison's eyes directly. Not challenging, not bowing, just truth staring down noise. Alexander spoke as softly as the sea breeze. "My call sign is Nighthawk." The entire room froze, not because of volume, because of gravity. 2 words, enough to change the air itself. 2 words, commanding silence, the way a storm commands the sea. Somewhere, a fork clattered onto the floor. A tray halted mid-slide. Someone inhaled, but no breath came out. Nighthawk. A name once whispered in hidden corners of the Navy. A name tied to a rescue mission no one else had ever replicated. A ghost commander. The man who stepped into hell and brought his team back. Alone. a legend. But no one had ever imagined he'd be standing here, mopping floors. Commander Rachel Brennan had just walked in. She froze mid-step, eyes widening. Her breath caught in her chest. Not just recognition, reverence. Harrison blinked rapidly. The mockery fell off his face, revealing confusion, then doubt. "What did you just say?" he managed, forcing a laugh that shook. Alexander didn't budge. "Nighthawk." Silence thickened. He didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Heroes shout, legends whisper. Maya tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide, full of pride and fear mixed together. "Daddy?" Alexander smiled, gentle as the afternoon breeze. "It's all right. Eat, sweetheart." Harrison swallowed hard, then attempted a laugh. Right. Next you'll say you used to lead SEAL Team 6. Alexander didn't answer. He didn't have to. The first voice to break the silence came from the young SEAL candidate who had seen the scar the day before. He shot to his feet by instinct, spine straight, heels snapped together. "Sir," he said, voice thick with respect. He's telling the truth." Whispers exploded through the room. Shock, breathlessness, disbelief. Then one by one, a few SEALs stood, awkward but compelled, like soldiers sensing a commander before they know his name. Rachel stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel, though her eyes softened. "Captain Harrison," she said slowly, "I suggest you treat Mr. Steele with respect, appropriate to his service." Harrison's face burned red. Embarrassment, anger, confusion, then fear. Power had shifted, and he was the last to realize it. Alexander returned to Maya, spreading peanut butter on the second sandwich, as if the room hadn't frozen around them. "You okay, little one?" Maya nodded vigorously, eyes shining. "Daddy, are you really Nighthawk?" Alexander brushed crumbs from her cheek, his voice warm as a hand on the heart. "No, I'm your dad. That's all. And that's enough." Rachel drew in a breath. Not out of romance, not yet, but out of pure respect. Because she was witnessing a man who had once stood at the peak of glory, now choosing to sit beside his daughter, quietly, like a prayer. Across the room, the American flag fluttered gently from the draft of the open door, light catching every fold. And everyone who witnessed that moment understood a truth the military spends a lifetime trying to teach. Rank demands obedience, but character earns loyalty. Alexander didn't need stars on his shoulders. He carried honor in his silence, and a daughter clinging to him, and the entire room, every last person, understood. Nighthawk hadn't fallen. He simply chose to land where love needed him most. The mess hall hung in stunned silence, as if even time itself had paused to breathe. Conversations died mid-sentence. Utensils hovered forgotten above plates. Even the faint flicker of fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of revelation. Alexander Steele, the quiet janitor with worn shoes and gentle eyes, had just dropped two words that shattered the entire room. Nighthawk. The name echoed in the minds of sailors and SEALs. A ghost from whispered legends, now flesh and bone before them, holding a napkin in one hand and peanut butter on his daughter's sandwich in the other. Maya blinked up at her father, her small chest rising quickly, pride blooming, bright and fierce. She didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what he had said. Not yet, but she felt it. Children always feel it. She squeezed his arm, her voice trembling with reverence. "Daddy, you're Nighthawk." Alexander didn't answer at once. He reached for her juice box, carefully punctured the straw, and pushed it toward her, as though nothing in the world had just shifted. His movements were slow, calm, unrushed. A ritual of a father protecting his child's world from the storm outside. "Yes," he finally whispered, his voice softer than the breeze but steady as steel. "A long time ago." A fine ripple spread across the room. Several SEALs exchanged looks, not mockery anymore, but awe. Then, respect. They had grown up hearing fragments of stories. A rescue mission deep behind enemy lines, a trapped team, a commander who refused to leave anyone behind. Stories told in hushed voices, grown larger by rumor, but anchored in something both terrifying and magnificent. Then he had vanished from the Navy like dawn melting into morning light. Now they understood why he moved like a man, with nothing left to prove. Because he truly had nothing left to prove. Across the table, Captain Brett Harrison stared as if he had swallowed fire. His smirk evaporated. Confusion, doubt, and shame blended into a cloudy streak behind his eyes. "Nonsense," he snapped, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. "He's just a janitor. He didn't finish. A SEAL instructor, built like granite, eyes hardened by years of combat and loss, stepped forward. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Torres, a uniform heavy with ribbons, honor that needed no introduction. He saluted Alexander, not the polite kind, the kind a soldier gives to a legend. "Sir," Torres said, voice low, slow, reverent, "is it true?" Alexander looked up, his gaze steady yet tired. Like every answer required opening doors inside his memory he had long kept locked. "Yes," he said simply. A collective breath swept the mess hall. Doubt dissolved into respect. Respect settled into silence. Torres swallowed, visibly moved. "It is an honor, sir?" Maya sat straighter, chest puffed with pride. Alexander brushed a crumb from her cheek, offering her a quiet, private smile. One meant only for her. "Eat, little one." His tenderness stood in stark, brilliant contrast to the weight of the name he carried. A man who once led a team into fire, now slicing apples for a child. And in that contrast lay his truth. Harrison, face bright red, scrambled to grasp whatever authority was slipping from his hands. Ridiculous. Why would someone like that be mopping floors? Why would you? Alexander lifted his head fully, calm and unbroken. The look of a man who knew that sometimes lives depended on silence. "Because my daughter needed a father. More than the Navy needed another weapon," he said softly. Silence deepened. A sentence as gentle as a prayer, as heavy as an order. Maya looked up at him, eyes wide, fingers curling tightly around his sleeve. "And I need you too," she whispered, a tender challenge. Alexander placed his hand on hers. Simple, profound, something twisted in Rachel's chest. Respect, yes, but also something warmer, something she wasn't yet ready to name. Harrison, desperate, let out a brittle laugh. "So you gave up the warrior's life to mop floors?" Alexander tilted his head slightly. "I didn't give anything up. I chose peace." His words cut sharper than any blade. "Besides," he added gently, "floors are often cleaner than the souls in certain offices." A few sailors coughed to hide a smile. Even Torres's mouth twitched. Harrison paled. Anger flared, then died. He suddenly understood he had picked a fight with a storm, while holding an umbrella made of paper pride. Maya took another bite of her sandwich, finally relaxing. "Daddy, do we get cookies later?" Alexander's edges softened instantly. "Of course. I promised, didn't I?" She nodded, returning to her lunch. The room watched the exchange, the purity of the contrast between legend and fatherhood. Steel wrapped in gentleness. A legend who did not roar, did not threaten, but simply wiped crumbs from his daughter's lip. Torres stood at attention. "Sir, if you ever need anything at all, my team is ready." Alexander nodded once. "Thank you, son." The word son fell like a blessing. Torres stiffened, saluted again, and stepped back. Rachel finally approached the table. She did not rush. She did not make a spectacle. Her voice carried a quiet gravity. "Mr. Steele?" Alexander met her gaze respectfully. "Commander." For a brief moment, they measured one another through their eyes. Warrior and warrior. Only one still wore the uniform. "You didn't have to answer him," she said gently. "No," Alexander nodded. "But sometimes the truth stays silent, until arrogance forces it to speak." Rachel exhaled through her nose, not irritation, but admiration. Her eyes lowered toward Maya. "Your daughter is very lucky." Alexander looked at the girl, his expression softening. "I'm the lucky one." Rachel pressed her lips together, steadying the emotion rising in her. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Steele." "Thank you, Commander." She walked away, slow steps, thoughtful steps, leaving behind a mess hall no longer breathing the same air it had moments before. Alexander peeled an orange, his hands still steady. Maya hummed a little tune, childish, wordless, light, unafraid. Outside, the American flag flapped against the Virginia beach wind like a salute without command. Inside, many eyes turned toward the quiet janitor with a feeling very close to reverence, not because he held power, but because he had chosen to set it down. Rumors swept across the base faster than any order could travel down a chain of command. In the training rooms, whispers threaded through the thud of heavy weights hitting the floor. In the offices, keyboards slowed as discreet glances drifted toward the mess hall. Even in the farthest hangars, where fuel vapor hovered like fog, someone paused mid-maintenance and murmured a name believed to exist only in legend: Nighthawk. For years, he had been only an echo, a ghost in the stories swapped between deployments, a name only the sharpest rookies ever caught wind of. A man who led impossible rescue missions. A warrior who walked into fire with a precision reserved for a very small, very rare breed within the military world. And then he vanished. Not because of failure, but because of choice. And now, that legend was mopping the East Administrative hallway, with his daughter sitting at his feet, scribbling a smiling dolphin on a scrap of paper. Alexander wrung out the mop, the scent of pine cleaner drifting in the air. Footsteps approached, a slow, steady rhythm, as if the person coming carried respect rather than authority. A small group of SEALs stood nearby. Their discomfort was obvious. They didn't know how to behave. You don't salute a janitor. But what do you do when standing before a living legend? A younger operator stepped forward, close-cut hair, features shaped by years of discipline and hardship. "Sir," he said quietly. Alexander looked up, one brow lifting in faint amusement. "Son, I left the uniform years ago. Call me Alexander." The young operator swallowed. "Yes, Alexander." Then he hesitated, adding softly, "If any of us ever showed you disrespect before, it was because we didn't know." Alexander dipped the mop back into the water, his voice gentle but firm. "A person isn't owed respect because of who they used to be. You either respect them, or you don't, because of who they are right now." The young SEAL exhaled, as if freed. He nodded, sure, sincere, and stepped aside. The others passed by as well. Not a salute, but a small tilt of the shoulder that said, "We know who you are, and we honor you." Maya held up her drawing, eyes sparkling like 2 drops of sunlight. "Daddy, look, this dolphin is smiling because she has a family." Alexander bent down, studying the picture with the seriousness of a man inspecting a museum masterpiece. "She must feel very safe," he murmured, "just like I do, when I'm with you." Maya beamed, a smile so bright it lit the whole hallway. Not far away, Captain Brett Harrison stood frozen, shoulders tight. Shame clung to him like wet wool against skin. He looked at Alexander, not just looked, but observed, as a slow storm churned behind his eyes. Anger, confusion, and a fear he wasn't ready to face. Because if the stories were true, then Alexander Steele had walked roads Brett had never, and would never, set foot on. No matter how many stars he wore on his collar. And worse, the legend had willingly given up power. A man who doesn't need rank is the most dangerous kind of man to those who worship it. Harrison turned away, but Alexander had seen him in those final seconds. He didn't call out. He didn't sneer. He simply lowered his gaze and returned to his work. Because true power never needs to introduce itself. A figure stepped into the hallway. Commander Rachel Brennan stood there, coffee in hand, schedule tucked under her arm, posture straight, but her eyes more open than usual. When she spoke, her voice shed all armor of rank. "May I sit with you for a moment?" Alexander leaned lightly on the mop handle. "This hallway belongs to you, Commander." "I want to talk." Alexander nodded, motioning toward the bench by the window. Maya trotted over, hopping onto the seat, swinging her legs and humming softly. Rachel sat, smoothing her uniform. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence between them became comfortable. "You didn't deny it," she finally said. "Not when he mocked you." Alexander's expression didn't change. "No." "Why now?" Her tone held curiosity, but beneath it was something that sounded like genuine respect. Alexander looked at his daughter, then at Rachel. "The truth doesn't always need to shout," he answered, "but sometimes it has to be spoken, to protect what matters." Rachel followed his gaze to Maya, and she understood instantly. No explanation needed. "You left the Navy," she whispered. "Because of her." "Not left," he said softly. "Ran." A quiet thickened with things unsaid. "The world wants men never to be weak," he continued. "But she needed me. To be human." Maya suddenly climbed into his lap, resting her head against his chest. Alexander held her, naturally, instinctively, gently. Rachel watched. Something tightened in her chest. Not just respect, but a very human kind of envy. "We lost a pilot 2 years ago," she said quietly. "My husband. Combat mission. Everything was classified." Alexander's arm tightened around Maya, but he didn't interrupt. "I stayed," Rachel continued, voice steady but thin. "Led, served, because that's what the Navy needed." "And what did you need?" Alexander asked softly. A simple question, striking the part of her she kept locked away. Rachel blinked, almost startled. No one had ever asked her that. "I never thought about it," she admitted. Alexander nodded. "Not pity, understanding. The kind that comes from people who have lost too much." "Duty convinces us our hearts don't matter," he said. "But they do. And sometimes they weigh more than any uniform we've ever worn." Maya reached out and took Rachel's hand. A small, honest gesture no one could resist. Rachel froze. Warmth from that tiny hand shook her in the gentlest way. "If you want," Maya chirped, "you can have lunch with me and Daddy tomorrow. Daddy makes the best sandwiches." Rachel laughed, the first true laugh she'd had all day. "I would love that." The moment drifted easy, unforced, natural, as if something small but real was sprouting between 3 people who had never expected this. Then a voice called from down the hall. "Rachel, briefing room, 5 minutes." She rose, adjusting her jacket. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Alexander asked. "For reminding me of something important," she replied, voice softer. "The Navy forgets it sometimes." Alexander tilted his head. "Not all strength is loud," she said. He didn't reply. But the gentle curve at his lips answered for him. Night settled over Little Creek like a soft blue blanket. The sea breeze carried salt and stories, sweeping past the hangars and along the barracks rows. Along the seawall, the strip of lights winked steadily, the quiet lighthouses guiding weary sailors back to rest. Alexander walked toward the gate, his calloused hand holding Maya's tiny hand. Her backpack bounced with every step. The little dolphin charm tied to the zipper jingled, innocent as its owner. "Daddy," she hopped, "can we go to the beach for a bit before dinner? I want to show the waves my drawing." He glanced down at her shining eyes, cheeks rosy all day. There was no reality in which he would deny that pure joy. "Just a little while," he said, squeezing her hand with good cheer, "before your belly starts making whale sounds." "My belly doesn't do that," she protested, mock serious. Then, lower, "But maybe soon." They reached the seawall, waves stroking the face of the rocks. Maya ran ahead, holding her dolphin drawing up proudly toward the horizon. "Ocean, I drew your friend for you." Alexander leaned against the railing, letting the wind carry off the heaviness of the day. Not a burden, but the weight of a truth newly spoken. The silence here was benevolent. The peace here was a reward. Footsteps approached, steady, confident, but softer than an order. Rachel Brennan. Even off duty, she carried the bearing of an officer used to standing in the storm. Only tonight, there were no gleaming whites or shined shoes. She wore a navy blouse, trousers, her hair loose for the first time, dark brown strands swaying in the wind. She looked real, lighter, though the world still rested quiet on her shoulders. "Good evening, Alexander," she said softly. He nodded. "Commander." "Rachel," she corrected, gentler. "For now, just Rachel." He tilted his head, accepting that small, sincere lowering of armor. Maya spotted her and waved excitedly. "Hello, Commander Lady." Rachel smiled, so widely that she surprised herself. "Hi, Maya. Did your dolphin make the ocean happy?" Maya turned to the waves, very serious. "I think so. They're smiling in water language." Alexander gave a quiet chuckle. Something eased in Rachel's chest, a feeling she rarely had, in or out of uniform. A few minutes passed with the three of them simply standing together, watching the tide creep in. No rank, no legend, just people and a quiet sea. "You know," Rachel said, voice softer than the surf, "I've spent years studying leadership, strategy, orders, presence." She exhaled slowly. "But today, I learned something else." Alexander didn't ask, didn't press. He just listened, the skill of men who only learn after they've survived. "I saw a man carry power without needing to use it," she continued, "and I thought, maybe the Navy didn't lose you." She paused. "Maybe the world gained something else." Alexander's eyes followed Maya, who was skipping along the edge of the seawall. "I didn't stop serving," he said quietly. "I just changed who I serve." Rachel's throat tightened, emotion arriving unannounced. "Your daughter is blessed," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "I'm the lucky one." She looked at him, really looked this time. The laugh lines at his eyes etched by a child's giggles, not shouted orders. Scars that didn't define him, only shaped the way he cherished the life he had now. A steadiness that came not from pride, but from purpose. "You know," she said like the wind, "some people chase glory their whole lives." She halted. "But you let it go for love." Alexander rested his elbows on the railing. "Glory doesn't hold her when night falls," he said. "Doesn't soothe her when she cries for her mother. Doesn't pack her lunch or braid her hair." A shadow crossed his face. Memory, grief, and vow blending into something sacred. "She needed a father," he finished softly. "Not a flag." Rachel nodded very slowly. Something in her turned gently. "And somehow, you're honoring both." Maya came bounding back, out of breath. "Daddy! Commander Rachel! Tomorrow let's get ice cream together, as a team." Rachel blinked. "Ice cream? As a team?" Maya nodded solemnly. "Yes, Daddy and I are Team Dolphin. You can be Team Eagle." Rachel laughed, a real ringing laugh, like dust shaken from the soul. "I'd be honored," she said, "but let's make it tomorrow. It's late tonight." Maya considered, then nodded. "Okay, tomorrow's mission, ice cream." Alexander smoothed her hair. Mission approved. Maya darted off again, free as the wind. Rachel watched her, whispering, "She healed you." Alexander's jaw set, not from pain, but from truth. "She reminds me that living isn't just surviving. Living is living." They walked slowly toward the gate, Maya skipping, Alexander steady, Rachel thoughtful. Each step seemed to rearrange the world into something gentler. At the parking lot, a few sailors caught sight of Alexander. Conversations sagged mid-sentence. They straightened almost by reflex, not to salute, no formalities, just the natural respect of human beings. They murmured a few words, eyes bright with regard, but none came close to intrude. Rachel noticed. "Does it bother you?" she asked softly. "The attention?" "No," he said, "but I don't need it. Most men crave it." He glanced over, a thin smile at the corner of his mouth. "Most haven't learned the important thing." They stopped at the gate. The American flag snapped in the evening wind. Maya raised her hand in a solemn salute. Childish, but sincere. Rachel returned it, almost without thinking. Alexander didn't salute. He looked at the flag like an old friend, grateful, but at a distance. Just before they parted, Rachel hesitated a beat. "Alexander," she said quietly, "would you like to have dinner with me and Maya sometime? As friends?" Alexander considered. Not from shyness, not from doubt, but because he seldom let people close. "Perhaps," he said, "if life allows." Maya tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, she's lonely. Lonely people should eat with friends. That's a rule." Alexander's gaze softened on his daughter, then lifted to Rachel. "Perhaps life will allow it," he said gently. A breeze swept through, cool, kind, full of possibility. Rachel nodded, not like an officer, but like a woman who had found a sliver of light after loss. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Rachel." "Good night." "Commander lady," Maya called out. Rachel smiled again, softer. "Good night, Team Dolphin." They split 3 ways just before the gate. 3 silhouettes etched into the pale blue of dusk, each walking toward a future none of them had yet imagined. Above, the flag rippled, quiet, proud. The base seemed to breathe differently that night. Because somewhere among those footsteps was a man who had once conquered battlefields, and now chose to conquer loneliness, one small hand at a time. Saturday morning was golden and warm, sunlight scattering a soft yellow ribbon across the ocean like a gentle promise. The base gate shimmered in the brightness, the flag rippling lightly in the calm shoreline wind. Families jogged together. Sailors with gear bags strode toward training towers and classrooms. Life moved the way it always did, steady, proud, unmistakably American. But today, something felt different. Alexander hadn't planned anything special. Saturdays were for the library, animal-shaped pancakes, and slow walks along the pier, where Maya commanded her imaginary ocean fleet made of goldfish crackers. Yet, as the 2 of them approached the base entrance like they did every weekend, the air seemed charged, like memory itself was holding its breath. Maya swung her lunch bag joyfully, chatting about how dolphins deserved a tiny Navy medal for bravery. "And they probably need goggles, too," she added seriously. "Salt water stings." Alexander smiled. "One day, you're going to change the world." "I'm already changing it," she declared, chin lifted, "because I have the best dad ever." A command voice rang out behind them. "Form up!" Alexander froze for half a second and turned. The usually quiet road ahead was now lined on both sides with rows of uniforms. Sailors, Marines, aviators, officers. Uniforms crisp as steel, shoes polished to mirrors, backs straight, eyes forward. They stood like an honor guard of dignity, forming a corridor from the gate to the center of the base. At the front was Commander Rachel Brennan, cover tucked under her arm, hair loose and moving gently in the breeze. She found Alexander's eyes, steady, gentle, and glowing with quiet pride. Maya blinked, stunned. "Daddy, did we win something?" Alexander stood rooted. He had gone through firefights and midnight raids with less astonishment than this moment. He looked around, not with arrogance, but with a humility so deep that the very air around him seemed to soften. Silence fell, reverent, solemn. And then, as one, the entire formation raised their hands in salute. Not for Nighthawk, the legend, but for Alexander Steele, the man. Maya gasped softly. "Daddy, they're saluting you." Alexander swallowed, feeling the weight of love and recognition settle over old scars that had long stopped bleeding but never quite disappeared. A Master Chief stepped forward. "Sir," he said calmly, "some people serve this country by leading warriors." He paused. "And some serve by raising the warrior who's yet to come." A young SEAL added quietly, "Thank you for showing us what honor looks like when there's no uniform over it." A Marine captain nodded. "You reminded us there's more than one battlefield, more than one kind of hero." Maya squeezed his hand, eyes bright as stars. "Daddy, you're glowing." Alexander exhaled slowly. What tightened in his chest wasn't pain, it was belonging, warm and bright as sunlight. He looked at Rachel. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until she stood before him. Her voice was soft, but carried the force of a truth higher than any protocol. A soldier who protected his country. She looked at Maya, then back at him. And a father who is protecting the future of that country. Alexander held her gaze. "I didn't expect this." "No hero ever does," she answered quietly. Maya tugged Rachel's sleeve. "Commander Lady!" Rachel knelt to eye level. "Yes, sweetheart?" Maya pointed down the honor path. "Can we walk in the middle?" Rachel's eyes warmed. "This path is for both of you." Maya's breath seemed to catch, the greatness of the moment settling into her small heart like starlight over still water. "Then, Daddy goes first." Alexander shook his head. "We go together." She nodded hard, gripping his hand with conviction. "Together. Always." They stepped forward. With every step, hands lifted in salute, not to the warrior he once was, but to the father he chose to become. There were wet eyes, proud smiles, soft murmurs traveling through the ranks, a lesson whispered in real time. Greatness doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply holds a child's hand. Halfway down, Maya suddenly stopped. "Wait!" The entire corridor stalled. She dropped her father's hand, ran to Rachel, grabbed her fingers, and tugged hard. "You come too. Heroes don't walk alone." Rachel froze, then felt something deep and old stir inside her. She took the child's hand, then Alexander's, forming a small, unbreakable circle in the middle of a sea of uniforms. And the three of them walked the rest of the way together. A father, a daughter, a woman rediscovering hope, together toward the sunlight. Toward a life beyond sacrifice. Toward the quiet happiness earned after both visible and invisible battles. At the end of the path, a soft round of applause began. One pair of hands, then another, then more. In moments, the clapping swelled, gentle, dignified, like waves brushing a peaceful shore. Not the roar of a celebration, but the breath of gratitude. Alexander bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered, "for honoring not who I used to be, but who I chose to become." Rachel leaned in, her voice just loud enough to rise above the wind. A hero can retire from the service, but a father never retires. Maya lifted both their hands, triumphant. And now, ice cream. Laughter rippled through the formation. Alexander smiled. A full, unguarded smile he hadn't felt in years. Ice cream sounds like a mission everyone can get behind. Rachel's fingertips brushed his, a quiet promise. No rush, no spectacle, just sincerity and patience. "Let's go," she said softly. 3 hands intertwined, heart beside heart. They stepped away from the formation. The American flag above caught the sun, gathering the day's hope in its folds. A lone hawk soared overhead, wings spread wide, cutting toward the open horizon. Not fighting, not fleeing, just free. And Alexander, the man who once walked the shadows and was spoken of as legend, now simply lifted his daughter into his arms, kissed her forehead, and stepped into the next chapter of his life. Not alone, not forgotten, but honored by quiet love, steady purpose, and the freedom only peace can grant. The afternoon settled over Little Creek with a quiet built from respect. Alexander pushed his cleaning cart down the familiar hallway. Today, everyone who passed by gave him a nod. Not because they knew he had once been Nighthawk, but because they finally saw the most important thing. He was a father who chose his daughter over glory. Near the medical station, Captain Brett Harrison was waiting. His usual arrogance had vanished. When Alexander approached, he spoke softly. "Mr. Steele, I owe you an apology. I mocked you out of arrogance, not understanding. I had no idea what you had lived through, nor why you chose this life." "I accept," Alexander replied, brief, calm. Harrison extended his hand, not as a superior officer, but as a man making things right. Alexander took it. "You taught me that leadership isn't a medal," Harrison said. "It's a choice." Both men walked on, lighter, better. That evening, Alexander and Maya arrived at Commander Rachel Brennan's small house. One of his hands held a bowl of salad. The other held a tiny hand bouncing with excitement. "Dad, do commanders eat dessert? Or do we have to salute the cookies first?" "They eat like normal people," Alexander laughed. "Good, because I brought cookies." The door opened. Rachel wasn't in uniform, just a loosely tied apron, her hair falling softly. "Welcome," she said, her voice so warm even she seemed surprised by it. "Commander Lady, I brought supplies." Maya raised the cookie box like a trophy. Rachel laughed. "Perfect timing. My mashed potatoes were about to revolt." The little house was simple but warm. Family photos, a wooden box of medals, traces of loss intertwined with dignity. A table set for 3, candlelight beside a vase of white roses. They ate dinner and talked about small things: school, favorite ice cream flavors, and why dolphins deserve to be Navy officers. After dinner, Alexander washed dishes while Rachel dried them. Their rhythm blended naturally. "I do this every night," Alexander said, "part of raising a tiny general." "You make everything look easy," Rachel murmured. "It isn't easy, but it's worth it." A quiet pause. Rachel lowered her voice. "After my husband died, I clung to the uniform to escape an empty house." "Duty can become armor," Alexander replied, "but wear it too long, and it gets heavy. Sometimes you have to take a piece off. Start with something small. A dinner, a laugh." Rachel's eyes softened. "Thank you for reminding me I can still feel those things." At that moment, Maya came running with a game box in her arms. "New mission! Candyland!" They played for real joy. Maya cheated twice. Rachel pretended not to notice. Alexander pretended to lose. "Victory for Team Dolphin!" Maya shouted. The night closed with small, gentle things: a warm kitchen, a clean sink, and an air that felt newly light. When it was time to leave, Maya hugged Rachel tightly. "You're part of our team now." "Thank you, sweetheart," Rachel replied, her voice husky. Alexander smiled. "Thank you for dinner. Thank you for making me feel normal," Rachel said quietly. "You don't have to choose between strong and soft," Alexander replied. "You can be both." "I'm learning," she whispered. "Good night, Rachel." "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Commander Lady," Maya called out. "Good night, Team Dolphin," Rachel answered. Rachel stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching father and daughter walk away under the soft lights. A man and a child, a warrior and a home. Two worlds once opposed, uniform and ordinary life, now walked side by side as if they naturally belonged together. Her heart, silent for so long, breathed again, not because of glory, but because of human warmth. The story spread across the base, not as a legend, but as a lesson. Strength doesn't need noise. Honor doesn't lie in rank. And sometimes, the greatest warrior is the one who chooses love over war. Legends don't disappear. They learn to live more fully. And so the journey of Alexander Nighthawk Steel closed, not with battlefield thunder, but with a child's bright laughter. Not with medals, but with a small hand resting in his. Letting go of power to choose love isn't weakness. It is the greatest strength. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to follow us on more journeys of healing. And remember, you don't need to be a legend to change the world, just a heart brave enough to choose love.